This is the final video talking about how to interpret your 2x2 between subjects ANOVA in SPSS. This is also the final video in the lecture 14 for my Psych 301 class. So I ended the last video talking about the fact that one of the easiest ways to discuss the results of our interaction is to at least focus on what combination led to the highest numbers and what combination led to the lowest numbers. So we see from these graphs, and you can also actually just look at the cell means and compare the cell means, but we see here that the people who said, no, I don't have a job, and no, I'm not a student, had really high levels of caffeine consumption, so they were the highest in terms of caffeine consumption, versus the people who said, yes, I'm a student, and then since the line is green, that means no, I don't have a job. They had the lowest levels of caffeine consumption, so students without a job were the lowest levels. So also one thing to note is the graph that you get from SPSS is not in APA style. Never, ever, ever copy this graph and include it in a poster or in a write-up of your results. It's really tacky, so make sure to put your graphs into actual APA style, which you have to do on your own. So let's talk about how to write up these results in APA style. So we already got up until this point here where we added in the findings related to the interaction, and we discussed up to that point of reporting the partial eta squared. And so now here what I've added is just the interpretation of that interaction. So again, I focused on talking about basically the highest levels of caffeine consumption all the way to the lowest levels of caffeine consumption. So I'm getting these interpretations from, and again, you can look at just the means, the cell means, and compare those if you want, or you can get this information from the graph. But we just discussed how non-students without a job, right? So it's a combination of those two factors. So people who said no to being a student and people who said no to having a job, they drank the most caffeine. They had the highest mean in terms of caffeine consumption. The next highest mean was the people who were not students but had a job. And then it was followed by students who also had a job. And then the lowest amount of caffeine consumption was students without a job. And those people, those people were the ones who drank the least caffeine. So this is just one way that you can report your interaction. But one of the most important things to do is to make sure to create a graph of your results. So you'll see that I said see figure 1, and I'm going to show you figure 1 in a second. But figure 1 is just going to be a graph of your results. As I mentioned before, anytime you have a significant interaction, you pretty much should always also include a graph of your findings, because it's just frankly easier to look at than to read this whole mess of a sentence. Imagine had we also had the means in here, it would be a lot to look at. So that's why we usually include a graph as well. So here is an APA style figure of these results. So this is APA style. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of APA style, but I did want to show an example of what it should look like in APA style. This would be an APA style figure for a paper. If you're doing it for a poster, you can be a little bit more creative in terms of the colors of the bars. But for a paper, you want to make sure it's black and white or grayscale. So this represents each of those different cell means. So again, we have the no job and non-student, so it's the gray bar. That is the highest levels of caffeine consumption. Our lowest were here for the no job and student. And then these other two were in the middle. So it's always useful to include a figure like that when you're writing up your conclusion. And that would only be if you actually had a significant interaction. If you did not have a significant interaction, then really you do not need to include a graph like this. So one other important thing to note when you do include a graph or a figure is what it's referred to in APA style. Anytime you do include one of those, make sure that you're not including redundant information or repetitive information. So you'll notice in my conclusion when I was writing up the results for the interaction, I didn't list any means there at all. And the reason for that is that all of those means were represented in the actual figure itself. So if you have statistics that are either included in a table or a figure anywhere in your paper, make sure to not report those same values in your text. So you want to make sure to avoid any redundant information. So you're either going to report it in a table or a figure or in the text of your paper, but you're never going to want to repeat it across those different things. So thank you for sticking through to the end with me on this one. Hopefully that helps you understand how to interpret these analyses in SPSS. Make sure to contact me if you have any questions though, and have a great week. Bye!